of God, and that there is a God. Now will I shut my eyes, I will stop my ears and withdraw all my senses. I will blot out the images of corporeal things clearly from my mind, or, because that can scarce be accomplished, I will give no heed to them, as being vain and false, and by discoursing with myself and prying more rightly into my own nature, will endeavor to make myself by degrees more known and familiar to myself. I am a thinking thing, that is to say, doubting, affirming, denying, understanding few things, ignorant of many things, willing, nilling, imagining also, and sensitive. For as before I have noted, though perhaps whatever I imagine or am sensible of, as without me is not, yet that manner of thinking which I call sense and imagination, as they are only certain modes of thinking, I am certain are in me, so that in these few words I have mentioned whatever I know, or at least whatever as yet I perceive myself to know. Now will I look about me more carefully to see whether there be some other thing in me, of which I have not yet taken notice. I am sure that I am a thinking thing, and therefore do not I know what is required to make certain of anything? I answer, that in this my first knowledge 'tis nothing but a clear and distinct perception of what I affirm, which would not be sufficient to make me certain of the truth of a thing, if it were possible that any thing that I so clearly and distinctly perceive should be false. Wherever I may lay this down as a principle, whatever I clearly and distinctly perceive is certainly true. But I have formerly admitted of many things as very certain and manifest, which I afterwards found to be doubtful. Therefore, what sort of things were they, vis-a-vis heaven, earth, stars, and all other things which I perceived by my senses? But what did I perceive of these clearly, vis-a-vis that I had the ideas of thoughts of these things in my mind, and at present I cannot deny that I have these ideas in me. But there was some other thing which I affirmed, and which, by reason of the common way of belief, I thought that I clearly perceived, which nevertheless I did not really perceive, and that was, that there were certain things without me from whence these ideas proceeded, and to which they were exactly like. And this it was, wherein I was either deceived, or if by chance I judged truly, yet it proceeded not from the strength of my perception. But when I was exercised about any single and easy proposition in arithmetic or geometry, as that 2 and 3 added make 5, did not I perceive them clearly enough to make me affirm them true? Truly concerning these I had no other reason afterwards to doubt, but that I thought perhaps there may be a God who might have so created me that I should be deceived even in those things which seemed most clear to me. And as often as this preconceived opinion of God's great power comes into my mind, I cannot but confess that he may easily cause me to err even in those things which I think I perceive most evidently with my mind. Yet as often as I consider the things themselves, which I judge myself to perceive so clearly, I am so fully persuaded by them that I easily break out into these expressions, let who can deceive me, yet he shall never cause me not to be, whilst I think that I am, or that it shall ever be true, that I never was, whilst at present 'tis true that I am, or perhaps that 2 and 3 added make more or less than 5. For in these things I perceive a manifest repugnancy, and truly seeing I have no reason to think any God a deceiver, nor as yet fully know whether there be any God or not, 'tis but a slight and, as I may say, metaphysical reason of doubt, which depends only on that opinion of which I am not yet persuaded. Wheretofore, that this hindrance may be taken away, when I have time I ought to inquire whether there be a God, and if there be one, whether he can be a deceiver, For whilst I am ignorant of this, I cannot possibly be fully certain of any other thing. But now method seems to require me to rank all my thoughts under certain heads, and to search in which of them truth or falsehood properly consists. Some of them are, as it were, the images of things, and to these alone the name of an idea properly belongs, as when I think upon a man, a chimera or monster, heaven, an angel, or God. But there are others of them that have superadded forms to them, as when I will, when I fear, when I affirm, when I deny. I know I have always, whenever I think, some certain thing as the subject or object of my thought. But in this last sort of thoughts there is something more which I think upon than barely the likeness of the thing. And of these thoughts some are called wills and affections, and others of them judgments. Now, as touching ideas, if they be considered alone as they are in themselves, without respect to any other things, they cannot properly be false. For whether I imagine a goat or a chimera, 'tis as certain that I imagine one as t'other. Also in the will and affections I need not fear any falsehood, for though I should wish for evil things, or things that are not, it is not therefore not true that I wish for them. Wheretofore there only remains my judgments of things, in which I must take care that I be not deceived. Now the chief and most usual error that I discover in them is, that I judge those ideas that are within me to be conformable, and like to certain things that are without me. For truly, if I consider those ideas as certain modes of my thought, without respect to any other thing, they will scarce afford me an occasion of erring. Of these ideas, some are innate, some adventitious, and some others seem to me as created by myself. For that I understand what a thing is, what is truth, what a thought, seems to proceed merely from my own nature. But that I now hear a noise, see the sun, or feel heat, I have always judged to proceed from things external. But lastly, mermaids, griffins, and such like monsters are made merely by myself, and yet I may well think all of them either adventitious, or all of them innate, or all of them made by myself, for I have not as yet discovered their true original. But I ought chiefly to search after those of them which I count adventitious, and which I consider as coming from outward objects, that I may know what reason I have to think them like the things themselves which they represent. Vis-a-vis, nature so teaches me, and also I know that they depend not on my will, and therefore not on me, for they are often present with me against my inclinations, or as they say, in spite of my teeth, as now whether I will or no, I feel heat, and therefore I think that the sense or idea of heat is propagated to me by a thing really distinct from myself, and that is by the heat of the fire at which I sit. And nothing is more obvious then for me to judge that that thing should transmit its own likeness into me, rather than that any other thing should be transmitted by it. Which sort of arguments, whether firm enough or not, I shall now try. When I hear say that nature so teaches me, I understand only that I am as it were willingly forced to believe it, and not that 'tis discovered to me to be true by any natural light. For these two differ very much. For whatever is discovered to me by the light of nature, as that it necessarily follows that I am, because I think, cannot possibly be doubted, because I am endowed with no other faculty in which I may put so great confidence as I can in the light of nature, or which can possibly tell me that those things are false, which nature light teaches me to be true, and as to my natural inclinations. I have heretofore often judged myself led by them to the election of the worst part, when I was in the choosing one of two goods, and therefore I see no reason why I should ever trust them in any other thing. And then, though these ideas depend not on my will, it does not therefore follow that they necessarily proceed from things external. For as, although those inclinations, which I but now mentioned, are in me, yet they seem distinct and different from my will. So perhaps there may be in me some other faculty, to me unknown, which may prove the efficient cause of these ideas, as hitherto I have observed them to be formed in me whilst I dream, without the help of any external object. And last of all, though they should proceed from things which are different from me, it does not therefore follow that they must be like those things. For oftentimes I have found the thing and the idea differing much. As, for example, I find in myself two diverse ideas of the sun, one as received by my senses, and which chiefly I reckon among those I call adventitious, by which it appears to me very small; another is taken from the arguments of astronomers, that is to say, consequentially collected, or some other ways by me from certain natural notions, by which 'tis rendered something bigger than the globe of the earth. Certainly both of these cannot be like that sun which is without me, and my reason persuades me that that idea is most unlike the sun, which seems to proceed immediately from itself. All which things sufficiently prove that I have hitherto, not from a true judgment, but from a blind impulse, believed that there are certain things different from myself, and which have sent their ideas or images into me by the organs of my senses, or some other way. But I have yet another way of inquiring whether any of these things, whose ideas I have within me, are really existent without me, and that is thus: as those ideas are only modes of thinking, I acknowledge no inequality between them, and they all proceed from me in the same manner. But as one represents one thing, another thing, 'tis evident there is a great difference between them. For without doubt those of them which represent substances are something more, or as I may say, have more of objective reality in them, than those that represent only modes or accidents, and again that by which I understand a mighty God, eternal, infinite, omniscient, omnipotent creator of all things besides himself, has certainly in it more objective reality than those ideas by which finite substances are exhibited. But now it is evident by the light of nature that there must be as much at least in the total efficient cause as there is in the effect of that cause. For from whence can the effect have its reality but from the cause? And how can the cause give it that reality, unless itself have it? And from hence it follows that neither a thing can be made out of nothing, neither a thing which is more perfect, that is, which has in itself more reality, proceed from that which is less perfect. And this is clearly true, not only in those effects whose actual or formal reality is considered, but in those ideas also whose objective reality is only respected. That is to say, for example of illustration, it is not only impossible that a stone which was not should now begin to be, unless it were produced by something, in which whatever goes to the making of a stone is either formally or virtually. Neither can heat be produced in any thing which before was not hot, but by a thing which is at least of as equal a degree of perfection as heat is. But also 'tis impossible that I should have an idea of heat or of a stone, unless it were put into me by some cause, in which there is at least as much reality as I conceive there is in heat or a stone. For though that cause transfers none of its own actual or formal reality into my idea, I must not from thence conclude that 'tis less real, but I may think that the nature of the idea itself is such that of itself it requires no other formal reality, but what it has from my thought, of which 'tis a mode, but that this idea has this or that objective reality rather than any other, proceeds clearly from some cause, in which there ought to be at least as much formal reality as there is of objective reality in the idea itself. For if we suppose anything in the idea which was not in its cause, it must of necessity have this from nothing. But, though it be a most imperfect manner of existing, by which the thing is objectively in the intellect by an idea, yet it is not altogether nothing, and therefore cannot proceed from nothing. Neither ought I to doubt, seeing the reality which I perceive in my ideas is only an objective reality, that therefore it must of necessity follow that the same reality should be in the causes of these ideas formally. But I may conclude that 'tis sufficient that this reality be in the very causes only objectively. For as that objective manner of being appertains to the very nature of an idea, so that formal manner of being appertains to the very nature of a cause of ideas, at least to the first and chiefest causes of them. For though perhaps one idea may receive its birth from another, yet we cannot proceed in infinitum, but at last we must arrive at some first idea, whose cause is, as it were, an original copy, in which all the objective reality of the idea is formally contained. So that I plainly discover by the light of nature that the ideas which are in me are, as it were, pictures, which may easily come short of the perfection of those things from whence they are taken, but cannot contain anything greater or more perfect than them. And the longer and more diligently I pry into these things, so much the more clearly and distinctly do I discover them to be true. But what shall I conclude from hence? Thus, that if the objective reality of any of my ideas be such that it cannot be in me either formally or eminently, and that therefore I cannot be the cause of that idea, from hence it necessarily follows that I alone do not only exist, but that some other thing, which is cause of that idea, does exist also. But if I can find no such idea in me, I have no argument to persuade me of the existence of anything besides myself, for I have diligently inquired, and hitherto I could discover no other persuasive. Some of these ideas there are, besides that which represents myself to myself, of which in this place I cannot doubt, which represent to me one of them a god, others of them corporeal and inanimate things, some of them angels, others animals, and lastly some of them which exhibit to me men like myself. As touching those that represent men or angels or animals, I easily understand that they may be made up of those ideas which I have of myself, of corporeal things, and of God, though there were neither man but myself, nor angel, nor animal in being. And as to the ideas of corporeal things, I find nothing in them of that perfection, but it may proceed from myself. For if I look into them more narrowly, and examine them more particularly, as yesterday in the second meditation, I did the idea of wax, I find there are but few things which I perceive clearly and distinctly in them, vis-a-vis magnitude, or extension in longitude, latitude, and profundity, the figure or shape which arises from the termination of that extension, the position or place which diverse figured bodies have in respect of each other, their motion or change of place, to which may be added their substance, continuance, and number. As to the others, such as are light, colors, sounds, smells, tastes, heat, and cold, with the other tactile qualities, I have but very obscure and confused thoughts of them, so that I know not whether they are true or false. That is to say, whether the ideas I have of them are the ideas of things which really are, or are not. For although falsehood, formally and properly so called, consists only in the judgment, as before I have observed, yet there is another sort of material falsehood in ideas, when they represent a thing as really existent, though it does not exist. So, for example, the ideas I have of heat and cold are so obscure and confused that I cannot collect from them whether cold be a privation of heat, or heat a privation of cold, or whether either of them be a real quality, or whether neither of them be real. And since every idea must be like the thing it represents, if it be true that cold is nothing but the privation of heat, that idea which represents it to me as a thing real and positive may deservedly be called false. The same may be applied to other ideas. And now I see no necessity why I should assign any other author of these ideas but myself. For if they are false, that is, represent things that are not, I know by the light of nature that they proceed from nothing. That is to say, I harbor them upon no other account, but because my nature is deficient in something and imperfect. But if they are true, yet seeing I discover so little reality in them, that very reality scarce seems to be real, I see no reason why I myself should not be the author of them. But also some of those very ideas of corporeal things, which are clear and distinct, I may seem to have borrowed from the idea I have of myself, vis-a-vis substance, duration, number, and the like. For when I conceive a stone to be a substance, that is, a thing apt of itself to exist, and also that I myself am a substance, though I conceive myself a thinking substance, and not extended, and the stone an extended substance, and not thinking, by which there is a great diversity between both the conceptions, yet they agree in this, that they are both substances. So when I conceive myself as now in being, and also remember that heretofore I have been, and since I have diverse thoughts, which I can number or count, from hence it is that I come by the notions of duration and number, which afterwards I apply to other things. As to those other things of which the idea of a body is made up, as extension, figure, place, and motion, there are not formally in me, seeing I am only a thinking thing, yet seeing they are only certain modes of substance, and I myself also am a substance, they may seem to be in me eminently. Wheretofore there only remains the idea of a God, wherein I must consider whether there be not something included which cannot possibly have its original from me. By the word God, I mean a certain infinite substance, independent, omniscient, almighty, by whom both I myself and everything else that is, if anything do actually exist, was created. All which attributes are of such a high nature that the more attentively I consider them, the less I conceive myself possible to be the author of these notions. From what therefore has been said, I must conclude that there is a God. For though the idea of a substance may arise in me, because that I myself am a substance, yet I could not have the idea of an infinite substance, seeing I myself am finite, unless it proceeded from a substance which is really infinite. Neither ought I to think that I have no true identity of infinity, or that I perceive it only by the negation of what is finite, as I conceive rest and darkness by the negation or absence of motion or light. But on the contrary, I plainly understand that there is more reality in an infinite substance than in a finite, and that therefore the perception of an infinite, as God, is antecedent to the notion I have of a finite, as myself. For how should I know that I doubt or desire, that is to say, that I want something, and that I am not altogether perfect, unless I had the idea of a being more perfect than myself, by comparing myself to which I may discover my own imperfections? Neither can it be said that this idea of God is a false materialiter, and that therefore it proceeds from nothing, as before I observed of the ideas of heat and cold, etc. For on the contrary, seeing this notion is most clear and distinct, and contains in itself more objective reality than any other idea, none can be more true in itself. nor in which less suspicion of falsehood can be found. This idea, I say, of a being infinitely perfect is most true, for though it may be supposed that such a being does not exist, yet it cannot be supposed that the idea of such a being exhibits to me nothing real, as before I have said of the idea of cold. This idea also is most clear and distinct, for whatever I perceive clearly and distinctly to be real and true and perfect is wholly contained in this idea of God. Neither can it be objected that I cannot comprehend an infinite, or that there are innumerable other things in God which I can neither conceive nor in the least think upon. For it is of the very nature of an infinite not to be apprehendable by me who am finite. And 'tis sufficient to me to prove this my idea of God to be the most true, the most clear, and the most distinct idea of all those ideas I have, upon this account, that I understand that God is not to be understood, and that I judge that whatever I clearly perceive and know implies any perfection, as also perhaps other innumerable perfections, which I am ignorant of, are in God either formally or eminently. Doubt. But perhaps I am something more than I take myself to be, and perhaps all these perfections which I attribute to God are potentially in me, though at present they do not show themselves, and break into action, for I am now fully experienced that my knowledge may be increased, and I see nothing that hinders why it may not increase by degrees in infinitum, nor why by my knowledge so increased I may not attain to the other perfections of God, nor lastly, why the power or aptitude of having these perfections may not be sufficient to produce the idea of them in me. Solution. But none of these will do. For first, though it be true that my knowledge is capable of being increased, and that many things are in me potentially, which actually are not, yet none of these go to the making of an idea of God, in which I conceive nothing potentially, for 'tis a certain argument of imperfection that a thing may be increased gradually. Moreover, though my knowledge may be more and more increased, yet I know that I can never be actually infinite, for it can never arrive to that height of perfection, which admits not of an higher degree, but I conceive God to be actually so infinite that nothing can be added to his perfections. And lastly, I perceive that the objective being of an idea cannot be produced only by the potential being of a thing, which, in proper speech, is nothing, but requires an actual or formal being to its production. Of all which forementioned things there is nothing that is not evident by the light of reason to any one that will diligently consider them. Yet because that, when I am careless, and the images of sensible things blind my understanding, I do not so easily call to mind the reasons why the idea of a being more perfect than myself should of necessity proceed from a being which is really more perfect, it will be requisite to inquire further whether I, who have this idea, can possibly be, unless such a being did exist, to which end let me ask, from whence should I be? From myself, or from my parents, or from any other thing less perfect than God? For nothing can be thought or supposed more perfect or equally perfect with God. But first, if I were from myself, I should neither doubt nor desire nor want anything, for I should have given myself all those perfections, of which I have any idea, and consequently I myself should be God. And I cannot think that those things I want are to be acquired with greater difficulty than those things I have. But on the contrary, 'tis manifest that it were much more difficult that I, that is, a substance that thinks, should arise out of nothing, than that I should acquire the knowledge of many things whereof I am ignorant, which is only the accident of that substance. And certainly, if I had that greater thing, vis-a-vis being, from myself, I should not have denied myself. not only those things which may be easier acquired, but also all those things which I perceived are contained in the idea of a God. And the reason is, for that no other things seem to me to be more difficultly done, and certainly if they were really more difficult, they would seem more difficult to me, if whatever I have for myself. For in those things I should find my power put to a stop. Neither can I evade the force of these arguments by supposing myself to have always been what now I am, and that therefore I need not seek for an author of my being. For the duration or continuance of my life may be divided into innumerable parts, each of which does not at all depend on the other parts. Therefore it will not follow that because a while ago I was, I must of necessity now be. I say this will not follow unless I suppose some cause to create me, as it were, anew, for this moment, that is, conserve me. For 'tis evident to one that considers the nature of duration, that the same power and action is requisite to the conservation of a thing each moment of its being, as there is to the creation of that thing anew, if it did not exist. So that 'tis one of those principles which are evident by the light of nature, that the act of conservation differs only ratione, as the philosophers term it, from the act of creation. Wherefore I ought to ask myself this question, whether I, who now am, have any power to cause myself to be hereafter. For had I any such power, I should certainly know of it, seeing I am nothing but a thinking thing, or at least at present I only treat of that part of me which is a thing that thinks. To which I answer, that I can discover no such power in me, and consequently I evidently know that I depend on some other being distinct from myself. But what if I say that perhaps this being is not God, but that I am produced either by my parents or some other causes less perfect than God? In answer to which let me consider, as I have said before, that 'tis manifest that whatever is in the effect, so much at least ought to be in the cause. And therefore, seeing I am a thing that thinks, and have in me an idea of God, it will confessedly follow that whatever sort of cause I assign of my own being, it also must be a thinking thing, and must have an idea of all those perfections which I attribute to God, of which cause it may be again asked, whether it be from itself, or from any other cause. If from itself, 'tis evident, from what has been said, that it must be God. For seeing it has the power of existing of itself, without doubt it has also the power of actually possessing all those perfections whereof it has an idea in itself, that is, all those perfections which I conceive in God. But if it be from another cause, it may again be asked of that cause whether it be of itself, or from another, till at length we arrive at the last cause of all, which will be God. For 'tis evident that this inquiry will not admit of progressus in infinitum, especially when at present I treat not only of that cause which at first made me, but chiefly of that which conserves me in this instant time. Neither can it be supposed that many partial causes have concurred to the making me, and that I receive the idea of one of God's perfections from one of them, and from another of them the idea of another, and that therefore all these perfections are to be found scattered in the world, but not all of them joined in any one which may be God. For on the contrary, unity, simplicity, or the inseparability of all God's attributes is one of the chief perfections which I conceive in him. And certainly the idea of the unity of the divine perfections could not be created in me by any other cause than by that, from whence I have received the ideas of his other perfections. For 'tis impossible to make me conceive these perfections, conjunct and inseparable, unless he should also make me know what perfections these are. Lastly, as touching my having my being from my parents, though whatever thoughts I have heretofore harbored of them were true, yet certainly they contribute nothing to my conservation. Neither proceed I from them, as I am a thing that thinks, for they have only predisposed that material thing, wherein I, that is my mind, which only at present I take for myself, inhabits. Wherefore I cannot now question that I am sprung from them, but I must of necessity conclude that because I am, and because I have an idea of a being most perfect, that is, of God, it evidently follows that there is a God. Now it only remains for me to examine how I have received this idea of God, for I have neither received it by means of my senses, neither comes it to me without my forethought, as the ideas of sensible things used to do, when such things work on the organs of my sense, or at least seem so to work. Neither is this idea framed by myself, for I can neither detract from nor add anything thereto. Wherefore I have only to conclude that it is innate, even as the idea of me myself is natural to myself. And truly 'tis not to be admired that God in creating me should imprint this idea in me, that it may there remain as a stamp impressed by the workman God on me his work. Neither is it requisite that this stamp should be a thing different from the work itself, but 'tis very credible, from hence only that God created me, that I am made as it were according to his likeness and image, and that the same likeness in which the idea of God is contained is perceived by me with the same faculty with which I perceive myself. That is to say, whilst I reflect upon myself, I do not only perceive that I am an imperfect thing, having my dependence upon some other thing, and that I am a thing that desires more and better things indefinitely, but also at the same time I understand that he on whom I depend contains in him all those wished for things, not only indefinitely and potentially, but really indefinitely, and that therefore he is God. The whole stress of which argument lies thus: because I know it impossible for me to be of the same nature I am, vis-a-vis, having the idea of a God in me, unless really there were a God, I say, that very same God, whose idea I have in my mind, that is, having all those perfections, which I cannot comprehend, but can, as it were, think upon them, and who is not subject to any defects. By which 'tis evident that God is no deceiver, for 'tis manifest by the light of nature that all fraud and deceit depends on some defect. But before I prosecute this any farther, or pry into other truths which may be deduced from this, I am willing here to stop, and dwell upon the contemplation of this God, to consider with myself his divine attributes, to behold, admire, and adore the loveliness of this immense light, as much as possibly I am able to accomplish with my dark understanding. For as by faith we believe that the greatest happiness of the next life consists alone in the contemplation of the divine majesty, so we find by experience that now we receive from thence the greatest pleasure, wherever we are capable in this life, though it be much more imperfect than that in the next. End of Meditation 3.